Looks like everyone got a handout as we're going to pick up our next part of fulfilled prophecies of the Messiah. So we're going to get into part 3 here on the prophecies, the Old Testament prophecies given about Jesus that were all exactly fulfilled. And as I've been saying each week, that God reveals himself sort of like one of those puzzles, putting a puzzle together without having the cover, not exactly knowing what you're going to see or what you're going to get at the end. So each prophet, Moses gets quite a few pieces to the puzzle, and then David fills in quite a few, and Isaiah gets a whole bunch, and everyone, Micah and Zechariah, each one gives their contribution, and they all fill in. And then we get today where we live on our side of the cross that we can see the full picture of God's plan of redemption. So I was working on putting some final notes in this message a couple weeks ago, and Ezra came in the office and saw PowerPoint. He's like, "Daddy, I like those puzzle pieces." So I like those puzzle pieces. So even if a 3-year-old can understand it, I guess you're doing okay on your symbolism for the lesson. So we've looked at these verses every week. 1 Peter chapter 1, verse 10, "Of this salvation the prophets have inquired and searched carefully, who prophesied of the grace that would come to you." So that they looked and they studied, but they just had their little slivers. They couldn't understand the full picture, and they would have dreamed to get the view that we get, the understanding that we have. Verse 11, "Searching what manner of time the Spirit of Christ who was in them was indicating when he testified beforehand the sufferings of Christ and the glories that would follow. To them it was revealed that not to themselves, but to us they were ministering the things which now have been reported to you through those who have preached the gospel to you by the Holy Spirit sent from heaven, things which angels desire to look into." So not only has this been something revealed to the prophets, but the angels themselves have not known the full picture of God's redemption. They have inquired, and they've tried to put the pieces together that they have, and yet now we're so blessed to see what the cross and see how all those things added up together and to see the understanding. We'll look at some of these passages here that when Zechariah and David and Isaiah and the men God used, when they wrote those, made absolutely no sense to them. Why am I writing this? Why am I throwing these coins back into the temple, God? I have no idea why I'm doing this. But yet now we know. We know it. It makes sense to us. We also see Matthew 24 that Jesus warned over and over to his disciples, don't be deceived, because there's going to be a lot of deception out there. A lot of people are going to be led astray. Because, verse 4, "And Jesus answered and said to them, take heed, no one deceives you, for many will come in my name, saying, I am the Christ, and will deceive many." So there's always going to be people saying that, I'm the second coming of Jesus, or I'm the second incarnation of Jesus. There's that, or there'll be people saying, I know exactly when he's coming. 88 reasons Jesus is coming back in 1988, which was quite a while ago. I was 1 year old at that time, but it came and gone, and he didn't return on that day. Or Jehovah's Witness think he came back in 1914. Or there's always these people, Katie and I got married in 2012, and that was the whole the Mayan calendar. The Mayan calendar was running out, and it was going to be the end of the world because the Mayan calendar was running out in 2012. And so, of course, Jesus had to come back in 2012. Nope, it wasn't his time. He wasn't ready. So don't be deceived. He's going to come when the prophecies will be fulfilled. And we're seeing some of those be fulfilled, or the groundwork being laid for it. But he'll come when it's time, and he's going to come exactly according to the scriptures, as he's warned us. So we'll pick up here with number 24. So we looked at all with the first week, everything about his birth. He'd be born in Bethlehem, have a star, have gifts, all the prophecies about his birth. And that's what God gives these exactly how there could be no doubt who the Messiah would be of every stage of his life, his birth, his ministry, his death. All of that is given clearly in the Old Testament prophecies. Over 300 prophecies about the Messiah. We'll look at around 50 in total, but we'll pick up at number 24, that he would be hated without a cause. Hated without a cause. Psalm 69, verse 4, "Those who hate me without a cause are more than the hairs of my head. They are mighty who would destroy me, being my enemies wrongfully. Though I have stolen nothing, I still must restore it." And then as Jesus himself is speaking in John chapter 15, as fulfillment of this, John chapter 15, verse 23, "He who hates me hates my Father also. If I had not done among them the works which no one else did, they would have no sin. But now they have seen also and hated both me and my Father. But this happened that the word might be fulfilled, which was written in their law. They hated me without a cause. So the people had no reason to hate Jesus except for the exposure of their sin. That's what made them so angry, that his righteousness exposed the blackness and darkness of their sin. And so that's why they, instead of running to him for forgiveness, they wanted to crucify him and wanted to get rid of him, hated him without a cause. We see also number 25 that he would be the rejected cornerstone, and that God is doing a work, building a foundation, a building without hands, and one that a foundation no man can lay. And it says that Jesus is the cornerstone there. Psalm 118, verse 22. The stone which the builders rejected has become the chief cornerstone. This was the Lord's doing. It is marvelous in our eyes. So cornerstone was a bigger deal then. Today, we would say foundation, or that pouring the foundation. You got to make sure that thing is level. You got to make sure it doesn't have any cracks or any kind of bad soil underneath it, any weakness there. That Jesus, he was the cornerstone. So when they would build their buildings, they would lay down the cornerstone. It had to be straight on both ends, because that's how all the walls are going to line up. And if you're crooked, then your walls are going to be off and your walls are going to be crooked. So that Jesus, he is the chief cornerstone. And of course, we know God's work, his building, is the church, and Jesus is the foundation of the church. And this is also there in Daniel chapter 2, Nebuchadnezzar's dream. When Nebuchadnezzar dreams, there's his statue, the gold and the silver and the bronze and the iron, and this stone, this meteorite, comes down and crashes that statue, and then out of that grows a mountain that will last forever. And that's Jesus is the cornerstone. He is the foundation stone that is going to last. An interesting thing is that Psalm 118, when Jesus is with the disciples at the Last Supper, as they finish the meal and the feet washing right before they go to the garden, it says that they sung a hymn. They sang a hymn right before they went out. And the hymn that they sing is going to be this. It's going to be Psalm 118. That is what they always sang at Passover. So this is going to be on the minds of the disciples as they're going out and as Jesus is going to be arrested very shortly. So we see this fulfillment. Peter's sermon there, Acts chapter 4. Verse 10, let it be known to you all and to all the people of Israel that by the name of Jesus Christ of Nazareth, whom you crucified, whom God raised from the dead, by him this man stands here before you whole. This is the stone which was rejected by you builders, which has become the chief cornerstone. So the one that not good enough for us, that's the one that becomes the very cornerstone of God's work that he is doing. We see also, number 26, that Jesus would be betrayed by a friend. Betrayed by a friend. Now, King David writes this 1,000 years before Jesus, Psalm 41, verse 9. Even my own familiar friend in whom I trusted, who ate my bread, has lifted up his heel against me. So now as David is writing this, he's probably thinking in his own life. David had betrayal of different people, had betrayal of his own sons, had Absalom, his own son, tried to kill him, and Adonijah at the end of his life tried to kill him. And then we have David had some advisors when Absalom rebelled against him, that guys like Ahithophel and Hushai and some of them, they went with Absalom and tried to help him, and they ended up betraying David there at the end. And so perhaps there's lots of people as David is writing this that could be, in his mind, the fulfillment of these words as he's writing. But many times Bible prophecy will have immediate fulfillment and will have then long-term fulfillment there as we get to the New Testament. So when Abraham and Isaac are going up the mountain, and Isaac says, "Where is the sacrifice, Dad?" And Abraham says, "God will provide a lamb." It happens that there is a ram right there caught in the thicket. There's immediate fulfillment, but we know the ultimate fulfillment was Jesus on the cross. Same thing here, that David has an immediate fulfillment, people in his life who betray him, close friends, and then, of course, this is messianic about Jesus because Judas betrays him, one of the 12. Verse 47 of Luke 22, and while he, Jesus, was still speaking, behold, a multitude, and he who was called Judas, one of the 12, went before them and drew near to Jesus to kiss him. But then Jesus said to him, Judas, are you betraying the Son of Man with a kiss? So Judas, one of the friends there of Jesus, a close one, And we just wonder, how could he fool? Obviously, he wasn't fooling Jesus, but how could he fool the other disciples for those 3 years? How could they not know, be so blinded? I guess they were just too busy about themselves. Who's the greatest? Who's going to sit on your right hand and on your left hand? They just weren't paying attention to some of the more important matters. Hey, we're always out of money for some reason. It's because Judas is using it for himself. And so they just didn't notice some of those things. But a lot of it, we're going to look at all the details there about the betrayal of Jesus that's given in Zechariah. Quite a bit of detail here. What Jesus would be betrayed for. The exact amount is given all the way back in the book of Zechariah, Zechariah 11, verse 12. Then I said to them, if it is agreeable to you, give me my wages, and if not, refrain. So they weighed out for my wages 30 pieces of silver. So here the prophet Zechariah, he gets these 30 pieces of silver. We'll look in just a second at what he's supposed to do with that 30 pieces of silver. And but before we get to the next part of this, this is fulfilled in Matthew chapter 26 of when Judas gets the money, but Matthew does not write about this prophecy until the very end, until it wraps up with Judas throws the money back to the temple and the priests go and buy the field. Then Matthew writes out the fulfillment of this. But you notice Matthew chapter 27, verse 9, Gospel of Matthew says, then was fulfilled what was spoken by Jeremiah the prophet, saying, and they took the 30 pieces of silver and the value of him who was priced, whom they of the children of Israel priced. Okay? This is one of those that, like we talked about with Nazareth sometimes, when the Gospel of Matthew says that Jesus grew up in Nazareth, as the prophet said he would be called a Nazarene. That's not an exact prophecy in the Old Testament. The Old Testament prophecy is that Jesus would be the branch. He would be the righteous branch, of which Nazareth means branch. So the town of Nazareth means the branch town. And so that's a general fulfillment. This is another one that kind of hangnail, as we would say, can throw people up for a loop a little bit. People, is the Bible fully true, or can we accurately trust every part of it? This is another one of those that when people read this, like, is there an inconsistency? Is something wrong in the Bible? Because if you notice, Matthew 27, verse 9 says Jeremiah the prophet. But that Jeremiah didn't write this. Who wrote this? Zechariah. So there's Zechariah and there's Jeremiah. So what's the deal here? Is it a typo? Did he make a mistake? Well, we know the Bible doesn't have any errors. It doesn't have any mistakes. So what's the problem here? Well, in Jesus' time, and the version of the Bible they use what we call the Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Hebrew Old Testament, it was arranged a little bit different than our modern Bible. So you got your modern Bible, you open up at the beginning, the table of contents, you're going to have the Old Testament, you're going to have the law, the writings of Moses, and then you're going to have history, and you're going to have poetry, and you're going to have major prophets, and you're going to have minor prophets, is how we have in our modern arrangement of the Old Testament. It was not the same way back in Jesus' time. So in Jesus' time, they had 3 groups of the Bible. They had the law, or what's sometimes called Moses, and they'll refer to this in the Gospels, just be like Moses. Moses said, or the law says, so the first 5 books of the Bible, that's either the law or Moses. Everything else that's kind of what we today call history and poetry, Judges and Ruth and even Job, a lot of those, is just kind of all grouped together in their Old Testament was called just the writings. Or sometimes it's just called Psalms. So they might say, Psalm says, but even though they might be quoting from actually Proverbs or from one of the other books, they called it Psalms. They called the group of those books Psalms, or they called it the writings. And then the prophets, they called it prophets, or sometimes they just called it Jeremiah, because Jeremiah was the first book in that order, and then Jeremiah is the biggest of all the prophets. So, but you put the book of Jeremiah together and you put Lamentations together, Jeremiah actually, God uses him to write more of the Bible than any other specific person as far as those particular books. Now, probably Moses, you put all the books of Moses together, that would be bigger as a whole. But then Jeremiah's individual writing, the length of those chapters is pretty long. And so they call it Jeremiah. And then, so that's what Matthew is saying here. He's saying But in Jeremiah, he's referring to the groups of the prophets. So like today we would say Zechariah is in the minor prophets. That's what we would say in the group of prophets. Back then, Jeremiah was the title book for all the groups of the prophets, especially the minor prophets as we know them today. So there's no inconsistency, there's no error in the Bible. There's no, oh, my faith is coming apart because of this. There's just some of these details that can trip people up sometime if they're not sure of the answers. So we do see the fulfillment of this, Matthew chapter 26, verse 14 and 15. Then one of the 12, called Judas Iscariot, went to the chief priests and said, "What are you willing to give me if I deliver him to you?" And they counted out to him 30 pieces of silver. So several things in this prophecy. We have the exact number. So it's 30. It's not 25, not 28, not 29, 30 exactly. And it's what kind of metal it is. It's not gold coins. It's not copper coins or any kind of other form of currency, but it's silver. Silver would be the money. So that was given several hundred years before Jesus, in the time of Zechariah, prophesied the exact amount that he'd be betrayed for 30 pieces of silver. And then what would be done with that. So we looked here, Zechariah 11:12. So then this is the very next verse, Zechariah 11:13. There in Zechariah chapter 11. So Zechariah gets his 30 pieces of silver. It says, "And the Lord said to me, throw it to the potter. That princely price they set on me, so I took the 30 pieces of silver and threw them into the house of the Lord for the potter." Okay, now this has to be something that at the moment when Zechariah is doing this, he's like, God, I have no idea. This makes no sense. This makes absolutely no sense. God, why did you have me work hard, earn 30 pieces of silver, and then I get this money that could be used for a lot of things. It could feed the poor, could do lots of things. And I take this money and I throw it in the house of the Lord for a potter at the potter's field. Like, this makes no sense to Zechariah probably at the time, but yet he obeys because we know a couple hundred years later this is going to make perfect sense in the time of Jesus of exactly what was fulfilled in the time of Jesus. That we need to be careful not to put God in a little box of what only makes sense to us, because he's a lot bigger than we are, and he's a lot greater understanding than we can have. And so he's going to do things that don't always make sense to us, but yet in time it does come to pass, and in time the picture is clear. So we do see as Zechariah does this hundreds of years before Jesus, that's fulfilled exactly in the time of Judas. So Matthew 27, verse 5, then Judas, he threw down the pieces of silver in the temple and departed and went and hanged himself. But the chief priest took the silver pieces and said, it is not lawful to put them into the treasury because they are the price of blood. And they consulted together and bought with them the potter's field to bury strangers in. So this is so odd to me of like why they're concerned. Well, this is blood tainted money. Let's not use it for to pay the bills of the temple. They're not concerned about killing Jesus. They're not concerned about killing the Son of God or having an innocent person murdered, but they are concerned about keeping this little minute thing of the law that maybe we shouldn't use this money for the temple work for sacred things because it's got blood tainted on it, even though they've got blood tainted on them, the blood of God himself. They send Jesus to the cross. So they kind of got their priorities out of alignment just a little bit there. So we also see number 29 in Jesus' prophecies that he would be forsaken by the disciples. Again, Zechariah. So we were in Zechariah 11, now Zechariah chapter 13, verse 7. So that's why each one of these, you probably haven't heard a sermon series on Zechariah or very rare. Sometimes when preachers are at a church for a long, long time, you might eventually get around to a series on Zechariah or something, but often overlooked books of the Bible. But Zechariah, he's given several pieces of the puzzle of God's picture of redemption. Zechariah 13, verse 7. Awake, O sword, against my shepherd, against the man who is my companion, says the Lord of hosts. Strike the shepherd, and the sheep will be scattered. Then I will turn my hand against the little ones. So you take out the shepherd, the sheep are not going to know what to do. And that's exactly fulfilled in, again, Matthew 26, verse 31. Then Jesus said to them, all of you will be made to stumble because of me this night, for it is written, as he quotes Zechariah 13, I will strike the shepherd and the sheep of the flock will be scattered. Now, the disciples weren't expecting this. They were just a few hours before in the upper room. Well, I'll never leave you, Jesus. I'll die for you, Jesus. And Peter, they're all bumping their chests. Yeah, I'm sticking with you to the very end, Jesus. I'm with you all through this. I would never do that to you. I'd never turn away from you. And yet here they come, but why did they fail? Why did they run away? Well, because when he doesn't ask them to fight Roman soldiers, he asks them to pray with him. He says, pray with me 1 hour. And they don't. They fall asleep. And because they didn't pray, they didn't have the strength for the spiritual battle that was coming. Because they failed in the simple challenge, then they fell apart and were scattered in the main challenge that came. Matthew chapter 26, verse 56. But all this was done that the scriptures of the prophets might be fulfilled. Then all the disciples forsook him and fled. So that they all ran away. That Jesus went alone there, as was in the Old Testament when it was the Day of Atonement, and the one time a year, the high priest could go into the tabernacle and go into the Holy of Holies. He had to do that alone. He had to do that completely by himself. That's what Jesus says. He's going to pay this sacrifice for the world. He's got to do it alone. He doesn't have anyone there with him to help him. Or in Abraham's ministry, when God makes the covenant with Abraham, and they were supposed to walk together in the middle of these animal sacrifices, and that would ratify the covenant between them. But Abraham can't uphold his end of the covenant, and so the Bible says a deep sleep falls upon Abraham. Abraham falls asleep, and God walks by himself amidst the sacrifices, and the covenant is just based on God alone. There, he goes through alone, just as Jesus here. He goes through alone here to face the darkness and face the trial that would come, so that he would be forsaken there on that night. All these, and so we can see in the here, Jesus' ministry. We looked at he'd do parables and he'd preach to the Gentiles and he would heal people. All of those details. But then when we get to the final 24 hours there of the crucifixion and everything around it, it's just prophecy, prophecy, prophecy. I mean, they're just every single detail there, almost by the minute as they're being fulfilled. Verse 30 or number 30. The prophecy that Jesus would be silent before his accusers. Isaiah 53, a lot of these are going to come from Isaiah 53 coming up as we get around the cross. Isaiah 53, verse 7, he was oppressed and he was afflicted, yet he opened not his mouth. He was led as a lamb to the slaughter, and as a sheep before its shearers is silent, so he opened not his mouth. And we see that in Matthew chapter 27, verse 12. And while Jesus was being accused by the chief priests and elders, he answered nothing. Then Pilate said to him, "Do you not hear how many things they testify against you?" But he answered him not one word, so that the governor marveled greatly. So there's nothing he could have said that would have changed their minds. They already had their opinions made up, and it's sort of like getting into a argument with people on YouTube comments or on Facebook or any kind of internet thing, troll flame wars as they call it. You're just not going to change anybody's mind, and there's no point to it. So that's what Jesus has the idea here, that it's just pointless. Saying anything is not going to help whatsoever. So it's just going to give them more ammunition. So just not going to bother with it. And so silent before his accusers. And then also that he would be, number 31, he would be beaten and spit on. Isaiah chapter 50, verse 6. I gave my back to those who struck me, and my cheeks to those who plucked out the beard. I did not hide my face from shame and spitting. Now, I am not really familiar. I've never had a full beard or never had long hair, so I'm not really familiar with having your hair yanked on and pulled. But my wife, with her longer hair, if I'm like sitting beside her and try to reach my arm around her, sometimes I'll pin her hair with my elbow on the couch accidentally or something, and it's excruciating pain there. So according to people who have had their hair yanked on, that would be one of the most painful things, having your beard ripped out piece by piece. I mean, that's that would in some ways maybe hurt more than the whips or some of the other things that they did to him. Just the intense pain that went with that, having his beard plucked out. There's just completely torturing him. These are the religious. This is before Jesus even gets to the Roman soldiers. This is the religious authorities, the model citizens. That's who these guys are, the model citizens that you have to have a good family and have to be upstanding citizen to be a member of the Sanhedrin. That's who these men were, and yet what are they doing this to Jesus and beating on him, spitting on him, ripping his beard off his face. Matthew chapter 26, verse 67, then they spat in his face and beat him. Now, that's another thing that's not pleasant to go through, to have people spit on you. I know some people that have said they would rather someone throw up on them or other bad things happen than to be spit on. It'd be spit on as in some people's mind is worse than, I'd prefer neither, but yeah, yeah, and just, and then when you're a parent of little kids, you've lived through all of it, so it doesn't really faze you as much anymore. But here, so they're spitting on Jesus, that they're beating him, ripping his beard out. End of verse 67. Others struck him with the palms of their hands, saying, "Prophesy to us, Christ. Who is the one who struck you?" Mark's version, Mark 14, verse 65. Then some began to spit on him and to blindfold him and to beat him and to say to him, "Prophesy." And the officers struck him with the palms of their hands. And so that they want to try to play a game here. Let's blindfold him and then we'll hit him. Oh, he says he's the Messiah. He says he knows everything. So let's hit him and let's see which one of us hit you. Which one is the answer there? And I remember one is an old time preacher I heard years and years ago that he said they put the blindfold on Jesus initially so they could hit him and punch him and try to have fun. But then later they had to keep the blindfold on him because not for Jesus' sake, but for their sake, because of those eyes, because they could see in Jesus' eyes looking back at them that what they were doing to him and see he still loved them in spite of everything they were doing. They had to hide themselves from those eyes. They're looking at him. I don't know if that was exactly the case, but something I remembered for sure from a long time ago. And but they did put the blindfold there and ripped his hair out, spit on him, punched him, and just completely cruel in everything that they did. Number 32. Number 32. This is one of the clearest pictures of Jesus of all in the Old Testament is in the wandering in the wilderness when the children of Israel, they complain and they're murmuring with the, we've already walked through this place, or we've had manna too much. We're tired of this. And so God sends the fiery serpents among them, and they're people are dropping dead with these snake bites, and so Moses makes a bronze serpent, puts it on a pole, lifts it up. Numbers chapter 21, verse 8, then the Lord said to Moses, make a fiery serpent, set it on a pole, and it shall be that everyone who is bitten, when he looks at it, shall live. So Moses made a bronze serpent and put it on a pole, and so it was, if a serpent had bitten anyone, when he looked at the bronze serpent, he lived. And so Moses doesn't understand exactly why he's doing it at this moment, but he just knows God told me to do this, and this is how people can stay alive. And so here he's making a serpent. He's making the image of sin, putting on a pole and lifting it up, just as God took all of our sin and laid it upon Jesus there. Jesus carried our sin to the cross with him, but those that look to him taking the punishment of our sin. If we look to him, we can have salvation and we can be saved. We see this John chapter 3, verse 14 and 15, when Jesus is talking with Nicodemus that night. John 3, it says, and as Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, even so must the Son of Man be lifted up, that whoever believes in him should not perish, but have eternal life. And of course, next verse 16, as we're familiar with there. And we'll look at just a couple more here. Number 33, we're getting into the crucifixion. So that was all about the betrayal. Quite a few details there on Judas, exactly what Judas would do, the money, the amount of money, what would be done with the money, the trial. Jesus would be quiet. The disciples would all run away. So all those prophesied now into the crucifixion itself, that the method by which he would die and he would be the sacrifice, that was prophesied 1,000 years before Jesus, several hundred years before Jesus. All these pieces of the puzzle are given. And this is quite unique because when every single one of these was written, when David writes Psalm chapter 22, crucifixion was not even a thing. It had not even been invented. It's not going to be invented for several world empires after David, is when it's even going to come on the scene and even be popularized by the Romans. are going to be way after that. So when David is writing of these piercing my hands and my feet, it's not even, he doesn't even know, he doesn't have a frame of reference for what is this about. This is how you execute people. This is how you kill people. He doesn't know that because mankind was not doing that to people. They weren't killing people in that way at that moment. It hadn't been invented at that time. So Psalm 22, and we'll look, especially next week, we'll look at a lot of Psalm 22 as eyewitness version of the cross, basically, even though David is 1,000 years before Jesus when God gives him these verses. Psalm 22:16, for dogs have surrounded me, the congregation of the wicked have enclosed me. They pierced my hands and my feet. Pierced my hands and my feet. So they're exactly what would be done to Jesus on the cross, even though, as David is writing this, he has no idea. What is this talking about? Also, Zechariah chapter 12, verse 10. Now, Zechariah 12:10 is actually a prophecy about Jesus' second coming, when he's going to come the second time to rule and to reign, but it does mention a little bit about his first coming there, because verse 10 says, I will pour out on the house of David and on the inhabitants of Jerusalem the spirit of grace and supplication. Then they will look on me whom they pierced. Yes, they will also mourn for him as one mourns for his only son, and grieve for him as one grieves for a firstborn. So they will look on me whom they have pierced. Now, for them to look on him and to the one whom they had pierced, he would have had to have been an initial time for them to pierce him. So the Old Testament is not crystal clear about that Jesus would come the first time and then he would come the second time. If all you had was the Old Testament, you would probably struggle with that. But we look at it now like, oh yeah, that's crystal clear. It makes sense to us because now we know he's going to come the first time as a lamb. He's going to be pierced, and then he's going to come the second time. They will see him who they pierced, but he's going to come the second time to rule and to reign. And so, but you do have little clues here of like Zechariah. So, how could they see him whom they had pierced if he had not come once initially? So there were little snippets that God gave about the two comings of the Messiah. But we see this mentioned, of course, doubting Thomas there in the upper room, doubting Thomas, John chapter 20, verse 25. And the other disciples therefore said to him, we have seen the Lord. So he said to them, unless I see his hands in the print of the nails, put my finger into the print of the nails, put my hand into his side, I will not believe. And so that's how Jesus was crucified, the nails through, it says his hands, it'd actually be his wrists, the two bones on his wrist, and through his feet. And that also when the Roman soldier, when Jesus was already dead, but when they ran the spear up his side, the Gospel of John mentions Zechariah's prophecy. It says they will look on him who they have pierced. John mentions that at that moment when Jesus was pierced in the side. And then Psalm 22 is even more specific. His hands and his feet would be pierced. So all those details given about the Messiah. Two more we'll look at here. Number 34, that they would gamble for his clothing. Again, Psalm 22, verse 18. They divide my garments among them, and for my clothing they cast lots. So notice how there's actually two parts of this prophecy. So they're dividing my garments, but then they're also they're gambling over another piece of clothing. So there's two aspects of this going on, which, as David's writing this, he doesn't even know what he's writing about, but yet you would think, how could anybody know? Why would either they would divide all of it or they would gamble over all of it? Why would you do both? Why would you do both of that? As they're writing 1,000 years before Jesus. But then, of course, we know when Jesus goes to the cross, why did they do that? Why did they do both? Because Gospel of John tells us, John chapter 19, verse 23, then the soldiers, when they had crucified Jesus, took his garments and made 4 parts, to each soldier a part, and also the tunic. So, in every kind of kid's Bible, Jesus is wearing like this sash, red sash or blue sash there. So that's what we refer to as the tunic. And so that is seamless. So now the tunic was without seam, woven from the top in one piece. So that has some value because it's seamless. If they tear that into pieces, it's going to lose its value and it's going to become frayed and going to become undone. So that needs to stay in one piece, whereas the rest of his clothes, here, you take his shoes, you take his robe, they just divided up the little bit that he had there. They divided those parts evenly, but then they don't want to tear the tunic here. So verse 24. Then they said, therefore, among themselves, let us not tear it, but cast lots. We'll gamble for it. Whose it shall be, that the scripture might be fulfilled, which says, they divided my garments among them, and for my clothing they cast lots. Therefore the soldiers did these things. Now, did these Roman soldiers have any idea they were fulfilling the prophecy of the Messiah at that moment? No, of course not. They probably never even heard of Psalm 22, probably never read it in their lives. They probably can't even read the language that it was written in. So, but yet by their actions, they're fulfilling exactly the prophecy that was given of the Messiah years and years before. All the details that would happen there of the cross. Of David wasn't there at that moment, but he may as well have been standing there for all that he pierced his hands and his feet in Psalm 22 and gambled for clothing, and all the others that we'll look at next week of Psalm 22. Last one for this, Isaiah 53, verse 12, that Jesus would pray for his enemies. It says, therefore I will divide him a portion with the great. He shall divide the spoil with the strong, because he poured out his soul unto death, and he was numbered with the transgressors. He bore the sin of many and made intercession for the transgressors. So that last phrase there, he made intercession for the transgressors, or he interceded. He prayed for those who were wicked, those who were the transgressors. He prayed on their behalf, prayed for the very ones that were harming him and doing all these things to him. And of course, we see that in Luke's gospel, Luke chapter 23, verse 34, probably as they are nailing him to the cross at this moment, as he says these things. Then Jesus said, Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they do. And then Luke says, and they divided his garments and cast lots. And so with this, we'll end there, but we'll pick up with next time. There's 7 sayings or 7 phrases that Jesus utters there on the cross, and the majority of them are in the Old Testament. The majority of them are given 600 years, 1,000 years, 1,400 years. At some point in time, God gave almost every single one of those 7 phrases there from the Messiah, that it was given in Old Testament prophecy, exactly what would happen, that Jesus fulfilled each of those exactly to the letter. So we'll stop there. Next time we'll finish the view of the cross and the many other parts of the cross that were fulfilled, and then we'll get to prophecies about his burial, his resurrection, and his ascension that happens. And of course, there's many other Old Testament scriptures, 300, but we'll stop at about 47 or so. So we'll wrap that up for tonight. Any questions? Anything to go in that? Yes, ma'am.
Pastor Matt, do you know the number that is given that the chances of someone fulfilling all the prophecies with one?
Yeah, it's. I'd have to look at. It's in one of the books I have. So yeah, what are the odds that someone? Jesus wasn't the only person born in Bethlehem. So what are the odds that someone would be born in Bethlehem and then would grow up in Nazareth and then this? And, what are the odds of someone fulfilling all of these things? And it was like some number, more than the national debt, some kind of trillion. Yeah.
Right time, right place.
Right. Yeah, and it was something like more than all the atoms in the known universe, or whatever, of how many molecules in the whole universe contained. That's how high the number, the odds, as far as, and it's the same odds. I mean, what are the odds that lightning struck a pool of pond slime and it turned into life and turned into a frog and crawled out and turned into a monkey? But people believe that. People believe that, they believe those odds. They believe, what are the odds of 10 million monkeys with banging on typewriters are going to type out the Encyclopedia Britannica in perfect order? But yet people will say that thing, but then, well, yeah, I believe that because I believe in science. I believe in the science doesn't lie and that. So yes, so it's long odds, but people believe in long odds. Go to the casino and put it all on number 7. Take those odds for it. Yes. So, but yeah, it's. I'll have to look up that number, but it's some mind, beyond what our minds can even comprehend. There, but a huge number there. Yeah. Any other questions? Anything to add with that?